On September 22nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced that he would free nearly every slave held in every Confederate state on January the 1st, 1863. In December, as Lincoln addressed the nation, he said, "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We shall nobly say or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." And on Emancipation Day, January the 1st, 1863, Black men and women celebrated their freedom. This conversation is about a culture in crisis, a culture to include the people, practices, and policy. The roots of Black culture are intertwined in the very fabric of America and have created an experience that intrigues the best of scholars, an experience that continues to demand a celebration and influences generation after generation. In honor of Black History Month, I introduce two Black women scholars who are paving the way in academia and navigating through a culture in crisis. Dr. Dana Hines, nurse scientist. She is chief nurse consultant at the HIV/AIDS Bureau, a researcher in HIV and health disparities. Her work has been instrumental in shaping policy and culture, ultimately improving access to care. So I have with me Dr. Dana Hines, nurse scientist. And, I could go on and on about who you are and what you've done. I have history with you. You are the nurse scientist in my very first debut film, The Black Angels, A Nurse's Story. And you came in and just talked about that piece with tuberculosis, and you brought in the data and the science behind that particular pandemic. So here we are now, in another pandemic, and I brought you back in because that's what you do. But we're not talking about tuberculosis, we're talking about COVID-19. But what I want you to do here, in particular, and one of the things I wanted to do here for this Black History Month conversation with you two women that I am featuring, is to do that. I wanted to give you your flowers now. We have a tradition of honoring in Black History Month the then. But I wanted to have this conversation with people who have been paving the way and laying bricks now. So it's important for me that African American students see the role of the nurse scientist. Anyone who knows Denetra Hampton knows that that's my advocacy. I am a huge champion of that role. And I believe that we do not have enough minorities going into this role or who even know that the role exists. So today I wanted to use this platform to showcase the role and talk a little bit about it and what students who may be thinking about, or nurses now, may be thinking about going into getting a PhD and becoming a nurse scientist, what options do they have, what that role historically has meant, and what does it mean now post-pandemic for the African American nurse? Tell everybody, expand on my narration about who Dr. Dana Hines is, nurse scientist, and how she got to this point.
So in keeping with your theme of then and now, I'd like to talk about who Dana was then before she became the now Dr. Dana Hines.
All right.
And I think it's important because oftentimes when I've encountered people, especially younger people who are early on in their career, they look at me and they make certain assessments about who I am and potentially what I have. But nobody really knows the story about who I was then and how I got to be where I am now. So who is Dana Hines? Dana Hines was this girl who in 6th grade struggled through math in middle school to the point where she was placed in a remedial math class. I remember being embarrassed because the remedial math class was on the 2nd floor of my middle school, and everybody knew that that's where the special education hallway was. So I would be late to class every day because I didn't want my friends to see me going to the remedial math class. It wasn't that I didn't want to do a good job in math. It was that math was a challenge for me. And growing up in a household where I didn't have parents who were college educated and didn't have the resources to necessarily get me the formal tutoring, here I am in this class, embarrassed that I have to be there. And I remember the day that the teacher gave us all this little bag of like mini plain M&Ms. And she was like, okay, we're gonna put our M&Ms in a baggie and we're gonna use these to count. And I'm looking around the room and I'm like, I don't belong here. So that moment was so defining for me. I worked my butt off throughout the rest of the time to get out of that remedial math class because I knew that I had something more in me.
Let's just kind of roll into how the pandemic has affected us as a profession, individually and then collectively. So share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, pandemics aren't new. We've had many pandemics throughout history. But I think for many nurses today, this might be the first pandemic in their lifetime. And for certain, probably the first pandemic of their nursing career. So I think with that comes at the individual nursing level, a state of fear about being on the front lines. Am I going to bring COVID home to my family? What's going to happen if I get sick and I can't take care of my family? Or worst case, like what happens if I contract COVID-19 and I actually die? Is my family going to be okay? And who's going to be able to provide for them? We've seen early on in the pandemic and even in the first several months of the pandemic, there was a severe shortage of personal protective equipment. So we had nurses who were going to the front line, going into situations that they thought were very hazardous and feeling like, they're putting their lives on the line to care for others, but they're within this system that was unprepared to take care of them and provide for their personal protective needs.
Right.
So I think those same fears, historically, nurses have always been like viewed as these superhumans who were capable of healing and also showing empathy at the same time. But much like COVID has exposed so many of the vulnerabilities in our healthcare system, I think it's also humanized nurses more and exposed their fears and their vulnerabilities as well. These are one of those times in history where early on it was like we're struggling to get access to the immediate resources that we needed. We talked about personal protective equipment. Then there was the lack of Clorox wipes, and then there was the lack of gloves. I mean, things that, as you said, were unprecedented that we've never seen before. So I can't imagine being on the front lines and individually just having that level of fear for my well-being and my safety when I'm there trying to care for others.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that's one way that it has affected nurses individually.
Okay, so I couldn't agree with you more about it. Just imagine, new nurses who have just arrived into the profession, and then you are experiencing something like a pandemic. I personally can't even imagine the thoughts that were going through their mind, because coming into the profession alone is scary enough. And then you're trying to navigate yourself through, something as a new nurse, and then now you got to navigate through a whole pandemic. So with no rules attached, everything changed as folks rolled out into caring for people with this virus. So I think, I couldn't agree with you more about the changes that they had to adapt to mentally and physically. Yeah. So absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the profession as a whole. So we know individually we have a saying out there that says the individuals make the house make the cities make the states make the nations. Yeah. And so we just talked about that individual, how important, how that nursing individual is mentally and physically, and whether they are operating at their optimal, how that's going to affect us as a whole.
Right.
because it's that individual that either is going to make us or break us as a profession. So here we have now, on top of already challenges that we face in this profession that, have gone unnoticed. But this pandemic has revealed so many things about who we are as human beings and who we are as professionals, individual professionals, but then professionally as a whole. So now we have to have these deep conversations about where we're going, because we ran into something that, we just were not prepared for. And we ran into something that we probably still now are not trying to navigate through on how we're going to see how we can be ready for the next time. So with that being said, there's a lot of chit chat out there about individuals. We may not have as many people in this profession after we make it through this pandemic. A lot of people may be deciding that, I don't know if I want to serve as a nurse anymore. Maybe it's just not worth, my family, my life. Maybe that's something that I just don't want to do. Because we have to agree, everybody didn't come into nursing for the passion and the honor and to carry the lamp, carry the light. Everybody ain't come in to carry the light.
I'm like, I didn't sign up for all this.
I didn't sign up for all this. And hey, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
And so now the questions are arising. And I think this is something leadership is definitely going to have to sit down and grapple with. So, let's just talk about where we are. What's your thoughts on, as an educator, a nurse scientist? You went through the whole gamut. You have a PhD in nursing. And you've done research in areas of HIV, community. The grassroots level, the community, the people. So talk about where nursing is now as a profession. And what are your thoughts about what we need to do to move forward in a positive way and to truly get people to stay in this profession?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to circle back to one of the earlier points that you were making about how the individual, everything kind of builds on the individual, right?
Yeah.
And collectively, as a profession, I think there has been this broad sense of frustration with the system, with not being prepared about how to handle a pandemic, emergency preparedness, crisis management, leadership in times of challenging times like this. So I think that general sense of frustration is pretty widespread across the nursing profession. And also just this, I think for so long, we kind of fell into this space of being comfortable. I mean, we knew that our healthcare system wasn't perfect, but I think this realization that our healthcare system was completely fragile, and our infrastructure has buckled under the weight of COVID-19. So it's almost like the healthcare system had failed so many people in general, but now it was like the healthcare system was failing the professionals who were showing up to be a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, so the healthcare systems have been upended, and the safety nets that were in place really to protect those who were most vulnerable have really been just fractured. So we have a long way to go. I mean, I think as nurses, we have a tremendous responsibility for navigating through these turbulent times. And I think one of the things that has been made pretty clear, as you've already mentioned, is that we weren't prepared. We weren't prepared for this as a country. We weren't prepared for this as a healthcare system. We weren't prepared for this as a profession. I think a lot of nurses have experienced burnout for the very individual reasons that we talked about.
Yeah.
And as a result of the burnout, many nurses have decided, hey, this isn't worth it for me. So it's interesting because now you're seeing ads for jobs for nurses to go work in various places that have higher prevalence rates of COVID. They're now offering hazard pay or COVID pay to go work in these areas. And so it almost begs the question that if nurses are essential, and you can pay nurses this much money in a crisis. Why weren't you valuing nursing prior to this crisis? Why did it take a crisis to compensate nurses to a level that they are being compensated for
I know.
right now?
I know.
So, and this is why now we're seeing nurses going on strike. A lot of people are deciding that they want to leave nursing. So right at a point where we were trying to get to that part as a profession, we were almost at that point where we were having a solution for the nursing shortage. It's like, this is taking us back.
Yeah.
So now we're back at that point again, where we're going to see a lot of people leaving nursing, not wanting to pursue nursing as a career because they don't have the faith and trust in the system, that the system can handle a pandemic like this. And they don't want to risk their lives. They didn't sign up for this.
That's right.
I've talked to other nursing professionals and even medical professionals who have compared this to their earlier experiences of other pandemics, and one person that I talked to was like, when HIV was a pandemic in the early 80s and it was problematic, the difference is like providers and your coworkers weren't dying because they were taking care of people, because the transmission was different. But COVID has changed the game.
Yes, ma'am.
It's transmitted by air. It's droplet. It's airborne. So everyone is susceptible. So even now, you see, again, the provider burnout, the provider fatigue is the providers who are quitting, providers who have died because of COVID, because we did not have early on a coordinated response to how we were going to manage COVID.
You have been very consistent and diligent in that particular area, and I really wanted to bring that to light. Not just the fact that you are, in general social determinants of health, but that really is the focus of your research and your legacy. And so, I wanted, everyone to see that this in this series of having conversations with women of Black excellence, and in particular your journey, Dr. Dana Hines, nurse scientist and HIV guru, and representing this role we talked about earlier, that representation matters. And I wanted the African American nursing student to see, at least one person that they may want to reach out to about this particular role and why we need them. You just explained so eloquently why we need the minority nurse to pursue research and why it's important for us moving forward in this profession, and the culture. As we can see where we are now in 2021, COVID-19, trying to get through this pandemic, we need research, and the data clearly indicates that we need African Americans to pursue research and participate in those clinical trials. Multiculturalism is a constant debate about the challenges we face with diversity. As America is often referred to as the melting pot, multiculturalism highlights identities, art, expression, and achievements. However, today has given rise to racism, a victimization, and resistance of people of color. I had the opportunity to interview Janelle White. She is a multicultural scholar and director of multicultural programs at the University of Chicago. Her work has centered around intercultural dialogue and cultural identity development. She is exceptional. Hi, Janelle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
And again, we had a little chit chat off camera, and really good chit chat. And we were talking about, being, here we are, 2021, January the 20th. And it is an historical day for all of us in so many reasons, And one of them is that we had the first woman, and we had the first African American woman to be sworn into the office of the vice presidency. So I don't even know if I have the words to articulate what that really means, particularly for us, and what it means for America, and what it means for the culture. Because, what you and I are doing now, along with the rest of the world, is really basking in and celebrating this historical day. And I'm really glad that we got to come together on today. How amazing is that? Kind of like a post Zoom, post, party, inauguration day for this wonderful, celebration. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time to kind of, give a little homage to that and see what your thoughts are about what that means for us, not just as women, but African American women and as a culture as a whole.
Yeah. I saw the inauguration from my car. I was sitting in the parking lot and had it on my phone, and I immediately was just overwhelmed with joy, with gratitude. I was scared because you never know what could happen at any inauguration, especially in 2021 with some of the events that have most recently happened with the storming of the Capitol. And so thinking about what did it mean to go through with this moment, we as women, we have been able to vote for 100 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And when President Biden said that this was an achievement for women, that was great. But in my head, I immediately went, no, this is an achievement for Black women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Not to discredit women, but this opportunity that women now have and Black women have and Black girls, and to see themselves in such a high position within our society and within the world is absolutely amazing. I cried tears of joy. I just sat in my car and just couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I know for me, I was waiting for that moment when she and the first gentleman walked out. And of course, we all wanted to see the style, but we all wanted to see her enjoy that moment. And just having them introduce her and seeing her, walk out of those doors and take that seat and then, raise her hand to that vice president, position was just amazing. And I couldn't agree with you more about, what it meant for us, as Black women, as women, and, as a culture. I think, I had a couple was during the event and then after the event with other women, and I can tell you there was tears. People didn't have any words to say, and I, for one, am still trying to find the words to articulate what it really meant. And I talk a lot, and I can't really find what that actually meant, except to just see her, someone who has truly tried to follow her career path and see how she got to that particular space. It's really amazing to know that we actually did have someone break that ceiling, and to know that it actually did happen. It's not something that we read about or saw in a movie. It's something that really happened. Because when you think about the history of African Americans, we haven't had much of our work honored, and a lot of our work, for that most part, celebrated. So now to have something like that happen at a time such as this, it's absolutely, amazing for, whatever words you want to use for it. And I, for one, am glad that I was here to witness it. One of the things I wanted to do here was, give homage to people who are doing great things now and shine a light on the work that they're doing in the community and within the culture. And you're one of those people. So, tell everybody a little bit about who Janelle White is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be interviewed by you and to see all of the work that you're doing. So I really feel like this interview should be the other way, because you need your roses as well while you're alive at Hampton. So I am Janelle White. I originally am from Indianapolis, Indiana. I grew up in a family where I've got 4 older brothers. I'm the youngest. I'm the only girl. And that has brought its many challenges, of course, and thinking about my role within my family and how do I perceive my responsibility to family and society as well. I'm thinking about what do I bring to a larger community. And I've learned over the years that I value education. I value history. I started out my education at Ball State University and originally wanting to be a social studies teacher. I wanted to go back to my high school and take over the history department and become the history chair. And I decided that history was something I just enjoyed. I wasn't really good at being able to remember all of the facts and details and teach that to others, but it really creates a foundation and understanding for me that context is important. It's important to society, it's important to individuals, and if we don't understand history, we will repeat it and in much worse ways. And so I switched my major to psychology because I wanted to learn more about people and why do we do the things that we do and how does that affect the greater good. And I went into higher education shortly after, and I've been in higher education ever since, and working within housing, within residence life, and now within multicultural affairs. And so a lot of my work has been around eliminating bias from education systems, not only within higher education, but also elementary and secondary education as well.
Okay. Well, I can't tell you how amazing that is. I mean, we have had conversations before. This is not our first time meeting. And so I know about who you are, but it's fantastic for the world to now know who you are. So Janelle, you are a multicultural scholar, and you have been doing this work for quite some time, especially what we are getting ready to talk about, and that is diversity and inclusion. But in 2021, that word diversity has become one of the main topics, and it has a hashtag. And now everyone is trying to figure out what to do about diversity and inclusion. In my travels with diversity, as an advocate for it, as a champion for it, I always like to have a great conversation like you and I are having, because oftentimes people, when they are coming in a room or sitting at a table and we're talking about diversity and inclusion, everyone has their own definition of what it is. And so it's important, as a leader, to just have a conversation so that you can figure out what those definitions are and then come together and figure out what the goals are and the outcomes are going to be if you're trying to improve diversity and inclusion. But what I found is that there's a common narrative in my travels. And that narrative is the word diversity, that one word. If you were to paste it on a door and just sit back and watch how many people walked in that door and the types of people who walked into that door, 95% of African Americans would probably go in that door. People who are not of color probably would not go in that door. And the reason that I found for that is that they just don't believe that it includes them. So when people see the word diversity, they believe it means Black people only or people of color only.
Right.
So I believe that that narrative, if changed, people will engage more who are not people of color. And so then we're kind of on to something. We're on to, moving the needle a little bit more if people would engage believing that, hey, that means me too. That means me too. So that's where I hope that we can get to as we move forward, and we now have this newfound interest in diversity and inclusion. We have allies coming on board, trying to, find ways to help and, close that gap. I hope that they can understand that it means them too. That's what diversity is. What do you think about that?
Exactly. I 100% agree. I think when we view diversity as a bad word within society, it feels like people do not feel like they are included into the conversation, as you mentioned. And really what diversity is just accounting. It's how we count the difference that's in the space. We have diversity of people, we have diversity of thought, we have diversity of religion, we have diversity of gender, sexual orientation, etc. And so if a space is not diverse, then how can we ultimately become inclusive of the different experiences that are needed in order to make our community better? And I think when we look at diversity, we also have to look at inclusion. We can't just have the differences of people if we're not actually including those voices in the room and at the table. And if we know that our spaces are homogenous and we don't have a variety of people coming in, then we have to be intentional as a society to say, hey, I know that this person has a perspective. I know that this community has a perspective. I know that this religion has a perspective. We need to bring that person here so they can be a part of making the decisions and being a part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And that has to happen within all of our systems of power. It can't just be a table of middle-aged, white, heterosexual men who are making all of the decisions for people who don't look like them and don't have that shared experience. So when we think about inclusion, it has to be an opportunity where all voices are heard and those voices and experiences are actually valued in the space as well. It's not enough to just bring them in to share their experience and not actually take into account what their experiences are and how they can shift the community and the culture and the fabric if we want to truly be inclusive. Mm-hmm. So I wish it wasn't a hashtag. Diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, all of that, especially within this past year, has really come to the forefront of our society and what does it mean. And I do agree, people do not see themselves in that narrative. But if you look at the person standing next to you, you have some commonalities, but there are going to be some differences too. And we can still embrace those differences without negating who that person is. And I think as a society, we have to start to embrace one another and embrace those differences and not just ignore them and only focus on commonalities.
Now, in the wake of everything that's happened in 2020 and then hemorrhaging over to 2021, especially with protests and riots, how do you feel that where we are as a country, because the pandemic did some revealing, so to speak. It kind of unfolded a lot of or pulled back the scab on, some things that had always been there. So how do you think, we have these allies now who have come on board, whether they are individuals or companies, and truly are trying to close the gap on diversity and inclusion? Where do you think we are going in the future with that? And do you see a lot of authenticity with that, or short-lived type of scenarios?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I do think it will be short-lived. I think that if we look back into society and we look at when President Barack Obama was elected and his presidency, there was this misperception that we lived in this post-racial society and that things were good because we have a Black president and there are no other issues and everything has been solved. And that's not the case. Clearly, that was not the case. And thinking about how we as a society have to move forward, it's not enough to just have a few allies. And it's not enough to just send out an email. I remember over the summer, there were lots of corporations that would send out emails around their solidarity for African Americans and their experiences, or there were things when the pandemic was occurring and we had a lot of companies sending out emails to just say, hey, we know this is going on. If you can't pay your bills, let us know. That's still disheartening. That's not enough. That doesn't change anything. It doesn't change who's at the top of your corporation. It doesn't change your administration. It doesn't change who's elected onto your city council, and who has the power within the government or within your state or your city or town. It's not enough just to have a few. And so I think as we look at allyship and what its purpose is, especially in a time like right now, we need people to really be introspective about their experiences, and not only their own lived experiences, but how those experiences have contributed to systemic racism.
Right.
And what are you continuing to do to perpetuate racism within the work that you're doing, within your family, within your society? And not that you're always actively doing something, but things can be done passively as well. And so I think that the next step is having opportunities for dialogue, having opportunities for diversity, equity, inclusion trainings across corporations, across education systems, across really everywhere, so that way we can have a better understanding of the context in which we're standing in. Because this just didn't happen by happenstance. Like you said, 400 years. got us to where we are today. And when we think about the opportunity that we have a vice president who is Black and female and Asian and amazing, like all of the intersections that she has allow us to see where this community and where this country can go. We often talk about being a melting pot. I think we're a soup. There are tons of ingredients that are in there, and we're all working together to really make this really this really amazing opportunity for us to connect in ways that we haven't before. And if we don't grasp onto that right now, we're going to lose it.
Right.
And I think we're at a point with our new administration that is really going to test the next 4 years of if our communities can come together and we can live out what our American dream looks like as a society and not just as different ideologies.
Oh, absolutely. And again, today, as we talk, January the 20th, 2021, inauguration day for Kamala Harris, she is a testament that representation matters. And, and I feel that way about diversity and inclusion. We have went so long with not having, people of color at the table and in the space where policies are being made and changed and created. I think that is a first step. That is the conversation, but it's only a down payment. It's just a down payment for, something that we have to continue to work at. And everyone has to be authentic and transparent about the work. And I am constantly saying that to my colleagues and to the people that I work around in this type of work. You know this, you've been doing it just as long as I have, that it has to be something that, you're authentic about, not necessarily passionate about. You have to be authentic about diversity. And you have to be willing to be in it for the long term, because this is a long-term project, and so, I can't stress enough to the people who are listening to this video. This is, celebrating Black History Month, and it's one of our biggest celebrations about who we are, our identity, our culture, and here we are in a cultural crisis. And we're trying to make way again, and still again trying to get people to recognize who we are. And in the midst of something where, we have so many things going on socially. You have to think about, we just came off of witnessing, people attacking the people's house. People actually going across the walls of the people's house. And, we have to think about what that means. What does that truly mean for America? In 1940, Mary Church Terrell wrote, "A white woman has only one handicap to overcome, a great one, true, her sex. A colored woman faces two, her sex and her race." On January the 20th, 2021, Kamala Harris, Black, became the first woman to be sworn into the office of the vice presidency. In her acceptance speech on November the 7th, 2020, she said, "I may be the first woman to hold this office, but I won't be the last."